Welcome to Victory Quilts, a series about the 1940s told through quilt vlogs. Well, I'm Eleanor Burns. Today we're visiting the Marine Corps Mechanized Museum at Camp Pendleton, California. This is a wonderful spot to reflect about my dad, Irwin John Nagel. He was my childhood hero. Well, he joined the U.S. Army in 1942 after he married my mother, Irma. I just love this photo of my father taken at chow time. I can clearly see my dad right up in the front. The soldiers are sitting at tables decorated with flags, and FDR is in the background with more flags. In March 1945, Father completed military intelligence training at Camp Ritchie in Maryland. His tour of duty took him to Germany, along with his Willys Overland MB, short for military Jeep. This photo was taken in Wiesbaden in 1945 with his buddy Jacobs. You know, the military paid $738.74 per vehicle. Over 335,000 were made, and they could travel at 60 miles an hour. Well, I dedicate this quilt, the Army Star, to the men and women who served during World War II. We made this scrappy quilt with just a bundle of fat quarters. It was so much fun. It's rich with army brown and flag red fabrics. Join me and we'll march to the sewing room. In appreciation of the many thoughtful deeds of American women for soldiers, two young men in an Army training camp sent their original pattern to the Kansas City Star. Well, it ran in 1941. This is what the pattern looks like. I think that is really neat that two men designed this. But I do have to tell you, I did just a little bit of a change. Well, they had these, it looked like trees in the corners, and I decided to just leave off the trunks of those little trees. And so it's just a triangle piece square, strips, that's easy, and the star right in the middle. Goes fast. You know, I have already shown you how to use this little Flying Geese ruler on the 1941 9 patch. So I'm just going to go through it quickly. You're going to have to keep up with me. So this time you start with a 4.5-inch red and a 6-inch dark, a navy, and just place the two squares right sides together. See if you remember this. And then you put your ruler on and draw corner to corner. Draw that diagonal line and match up those corners and it will be perfect. Well, now that the line is there, you sew a 1/4 of an inch on both sides of the line, and this is what I did. All ready for you. The stitching, when you measure it from one stitch to the next, the distance in between should be a 1/2 inch. So get that perfect. Okay, then you just take this patch, now that you drew the line and stitched on both sides, you cut it in half. Now, regardless of the color, you take and you press the seam always towards the largest triangle. This time it is dark, but what is important is that it's the largest triangle. So I'm just going to go ahead, set these seams open, and press them. Now they really look funny. They look wonky. I guess that's a good name for it. Wonky squares. But when you take them and you put the two pieces back right sides together, you match opposite colors. Okay, you do red to navy, and you don't line up these seams. That's the most important part. And you will get 4 geese out of these two squares. So then take your pencil and draw another diagonal line straight through there. You line up the outside edges, but no seams. And you can always tell if you have like goose tails hanging out on the edge. Then you know you're doing it right. Well, once you draw the diagonal line again, then you stitch. Same thing. You just stitch a 1/4 of an inch down both sides of the diagonal line. and cut again on the line. We are moving. So when you open it up, ta-da! Okay, you say, oops, oh my gosh, doesn't look right. But look, if you fold it like that, you have two here. And you take the second piece and you fold it, and you've got 2 points for that star. So what I'm going to do, so I can press this away from that geese, I'm just going to fold it, match up the tails here, go to the seam and clip up to that 1/4 inch seam. Don't clip through the stitches. And then open it up, and with your iron, press right into that triangle. It makes it lay so nice. You're not going to believe this. Just get that all pressed in there. Good. Looking good. So now you're ready to square it up to 1.5 by 3 inches. So you put your geese ruler, you line up the lines right here, push it right up into the point. So you have your 1/4 inch seam, and then you just cut it in half one way, and then trim it, and you just keep on going right around until you have trimmed on all 4 sides. And that is a perfect patch. It's looking great. You've got your 1/4 inch seam there. You've got your seams right out into the corners. Perfect. So now all we have to do is lay out our center star. It is a 3.5 inch center and 2 inch corners. This is going good. You know that in the beginning of World War II, 150,000 women joined the Army. Oh my gosh, the wax, finally. And now we're just going to put those 4 points right in there. 150,000 women, and they were not readily accepted right in the beginning. Everybody was anxious about them because only the nurses had been in the Army. But then in the end, they praised them. So they would love that star. It's all ready to just sew together. This is like magic here today, because there is the star that's already sewn together with its rows. And look from the back side. You just always press the seams away from the star points, and then the center away from the center. Perfect. Now the corners are made with the yellow and the blue, 2 mediums, and for the 12-inch block, they are 4 inches by 8-inch rectangles. You just place them right sides together, draw a straight line right down through the middle at 4 inches, draw diagonal lines, and sew on both sides. I showed you this technique too. It's really fun if you've already learned a lot of these techniques, and then you just repeat them, you just get better and better. Okay, so just cut on the diagonal line, cut into 4 pieces, and these patches are squared up into 3.5 inches. So you find the 3.5 inch dash line on the 6.5 inch triangle square up ruler. Put it on there, trim off those extra pieces around the outside edges, cut off your tips fast, and then just open up and press towards the blue, the medium. This is fast. Okay, so we've got the 4 corners, and let's just add those right to this block. 1, 2, see? It's going. And right here and here. I think those soldiers would be really proud of this. And then all that's left is the stripe piece. It is 3.5 inches in the middle and 2 inches in the red on the sides. You know, you don't need to have a whole strip. You only need to have 15 inches. And these are also cut at 3.5 inches. You've got a lot of measurements at 3.5 inches. Use your 6 by 12. Just cut up into 4 sections. So you even have a little bit extra that you can use for another quilt. Just cut that off, get rid of it. And these get placed right in the middle sections. And you're going to see that they all line up. Everything is based on the 3.5 inch measurement across there. It is really great. And that's the block. This is the beautiful Hope of Hartford quilt. named for Hartford, Connecticut. It was printed by the Farm Journal in 1945, and what a story it has to tell. Well, after I show you how to make the block, then I'm going to show you how to make the ribbon border, and it's made with exactly the same patches, and it's easy to do. I know you're going to love this block. It has partial seaming in it. We're going to start with the 6-inch block. There's a yellow center square. There are 4 large star points, all red, 1 small star point, all blue, and then there's a background triangle and a background rectangle. Well, that's the 6-inch. I have the 12-inch pieces already cut. For the small star point, you need to have 1 blue 6.5-inch square. This is the background, same size. You place it right sides together and then just draw an X. Place your ruler corner to corner and just zip right down one side, turn it around, and zip down the other side. Well, there is a unique sewing on this that I want to show you. I'm going to start up at the top and sew 1/4 inch away until I get to this cross line. And then I'm going to stitch on the cross line 1/4 inch past it and then turn and go down the other side. It's kind of like a little zig and a zag. And we're doing this so that we can make every single patch exactly the same. If you just went straight on down there, you would have 2 opposites. So this way we'll get all 4 the same. Okay, I'm coming into that line. Stop with your needle down, pivot, and then you just have to guesstimate 1/4 inch across that line. It's about 3 stitches. I'm past that line 1/4 inch. I pivoted and I'm going to go down the other side, and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, right here, went down, across on the middle, and then down the other side. And then you just duplicate that on the remaining line. Okay, 1/4 inch away, make sure your needle is down, pivot, and across the other way. I actually went about 1 stitch past. Oh my. Not to worry, because this is actually oversized and we will square these up to be the perfect size. And that's what it looks like. It looks like a windmill right in the middle. If you can think of it that way, that'll be perfect. Now, take your ruler and cut on your drawn lines. So you actually have 4 pieces. Gather them up and just drop them on the pressing mat with the dark on the top. I always like to set my seam. And the reason I set my seam is that sometimes, especially when you're stitching on the bias, you get just a little distortion in your seam. And setting them just sinks the stitches right into the fabric, and seam is usually straighter that way. Boy, we want straight seams. No puckering on the bias. Now, the next step we need, these are the small star points. We need to have the large star points, and they are the 6-inch squares. I have red 6-inch. For each block, you need to have 2 of them. Cut it on the diagonal, and it goes right here like this. And the reason I'm placing it like this is so that when I flip it right sides together, I don't have to fight that seam. It's just going to go down automatically. Line up your tips right out here. The pieces are not quite the same size, but if you get your tips lined up, then when you square them up, everything is going to be perfect. You know, the Farm Journal named Hartford, Hope of Hartford, for 2 reasons. In the 1930s, Hartford, Connecticut had the Depression, just as every other small country did in America, but they also had the greatest flood on record up to that period. You know, they already had 6 to 7 inches of snow on the ground, and then it snowed, it rained for 9 days straight and dropped 14 inches on the ground. That is a lot. No wonder they needed hope. Yeah, I'm going to square this patch up to 5.5 inches. So find the 5.5 inch dash line and use this line as well. The vertical line as well goes on that vertical seam. Drop it on there, hold it tight, just about 1/8 of an inch is hanging out on both sides. Grab those up, get rid of that. Turn your patches and just trim those tips. And so this should be a perfect 5.5 inches. So let's just set the seam open and press. This is looking good. Very good. Now you'll make 4 exactly like this one. That is so easy to do. Now comes the rectangle. This piece is 5.5 inches, so the rectangle is 5.5 inches long, 2.5 inches wide. Just flip it right sides together and sew right down along there. Well, with all of that rain coming down, it knocked out all of the bridges. There was ice floating down the rivers. There were people that lost their homes. Homes were literally washed away. The bridges were out. All of the roads were out. The telephone was out. It was quite a disaster in Hartford. I'd say they did need some hope, didn't they? Now, with the rectangle on there, all you need to do is just press that seam so that the seam is behind the rectangle. I have 4 of them done. We're going to do that partial seaming. Now let's just put all of this out of the way. Start with your 2.5 inch center square, and we're just going to arrange these patches right around that center and swing it like this. And one more patch. Perfect. Actually have another one. An extra one for the next block. Now we're going to number these clockwise. This is number 1, mentally number. This is number 1, this is number 2, number 3, number 4. We're just going to go clockwise right around it. First, take that 2.5 inch square, flip it right sides together to number 1, and we're only sewing down part way. This is just that partial seaming. Down part way. Cut your threads and open and press the seam so that it's behind the center square, just like that. Seam is behind there. Now, that's the only partial one, because now we're going to take number 2 and just flip it right sides together to it, and we can sew the whole length of this patch. And we're just going to keep on going around, adding each patch until we get right back to where we started. And I think I'll just finish this one and show you what it looks like. It's just so easy to do. You never have to fight the seams. They just all work together. Cut your threads. Number 2, you press your seam so that it's behind that square again. Let me show you. Number 3 is going to fit perfectly right along there. And then number 4, you sew down, and when you get to here, you have to pull this seam away so that you can continue sewing it, and then you just finish along there. From the back side, the seams lay beautiful. It's perfect. So let me show you the ribbon border. The ribbon border is made with the same patch. It's just a little bit smaller. Now, to figure out how many of these patches to make, measure your quilt top where you want to put on the border and divide by 4. That will tell you how many of these little patches you need to make. Now, it starts out just like the other one does, only this measurement is a 5.5 inch square. It's your background and your small star point, right sides together. Draw your X, and then do that little zigzag right down through, and then cut them into 4s. Each patch will be exactly the same. This time we're doing a red little star point. Now, the opposite one, the large star point, comes from one 5-inch square cut in half on one diagonal. And that's what this patch looks like right here. This was a 5-inch square. So take your 6.5-inch triangle square up ruler and trim these back to 4.5. That's before the finished size of 4. Just 4.5 right here. Take these, get rid of them, and trim off those corners. And press towards the dark. This is so pretty. Now, once you make as many of these as you need, you open them up and you sew them together into pairs. The pairs look like this. You just flip them right sides together, sew pairs, and then once you have pairs sewn, you continue sewing into long pieces. And I have some long pieces here. I'll just show you how they look, how they're going to go around the corner. Let's just pretend this is going to fit one side, and then this second one is coming right up here for the second side. And all we have left is this little corner space. Well, that is a 5-inch square that you sew, draw a diagonal line, sew a 1/4 of an inch seam on both sides, and once again, we're just going to square this up to 4.5 inches. Pretty easy. That's why you divide by 4, because 4.5 minus your 1/2 inch seam allowance is 4 inches. Let's see. So press the seam towards the dark, and this goes right in place to finish off the corner. Beautiful. That's the very last step. Well, I'm hopeful that you will be able to get your block done. Hope returned to Hartford, Connecticut after America entered the war in late 1941. The productivity of airplane engines at Pratt & Whitney, propellers, and other goods of war pushed Connecticut into enormous industrial expansion. Well, by 1942, jobs were plentiful. There were many overtime hours, and real wages grew rapidly. Prefabricated housing projects were built for workers, and they began to commute longer distances. Well, stepped up production and employment was cause for celebration. This lap quilt made with 6-inch blocks is also cause for celebration. While appropriately named Hope of Hartford by Farm Journal, it certainly shows patriotic spirit with its ribbon border. The quilting is patriotic as well, with straight quilting lines in the lattice. There's loops in the first border and stars in the outside border. I love the Hope of Hartford block and all it stands for. I found this antique Hope of Hartford quilt in Shipshewana, Indiana, when I was teaching for the Indiana State Guild. It's beautiful with its blocks and varying shades of purple. Well, Shipshewana is Amish country, so the hex sign in the quilting indicates an Amish person may have made this quilt. You know, there's also a variety of purple fabrics used in the blocks. The fabrics in the points on this block are not all the same. It's their humble block. Well, I often put humble blocks in my quilts without even trying. Well, the story goes that the Amish place one mistake in every quilt so as not to liken themselves unto God. Well, life for the Amish was different than that of the life of the English in World War II. The Amish women did not work outside the home, nor did their boys and men enlist in the military. Well, the situation of Connecticut in wartime accelerated opportunities for women and minority groups. Well, women were the largest single source for new workers, although some of the employers were reluctant to hire them. The end of 1942 had 40% of manufacturing jobs for women. And sadly, within 10 days after VJ Day in August 1945, 73,000 workers were laid off. Well, the Hope of Hartford block is a tribute to those tenacious and patriotic people who, through depression and natural disaster, rose to the call to do their part for America's victories.